let's see, I'm going to just, when you're talking, I think I'll just stand.
Get yourself a seat. You can sit anywhere. There's no assigned seating or anything like that. There is a coat rack out in the hallway. My name is Linda McCarthy, and I welcome you here on behalf of the Downtown Business Improvement District of Missoula. I'd like to introduce you to the BID Board of Directors. I am going to ask you to stand. Our chairman is Tim France. Our vice chair is Charlie Beaton. We have Dan Cedarberg, Karma Gilligan, Ellen Buchanan, and then we have a couple people who couldn't make it here tonight, Kim Brown and Ginny Iverson. And on behalf of this board of directors, we are delighted to have you here tonight and very much appreciate the time that you've committed to spend with us and to help shape the future of our downtown Missoula. I have a couple of housekeeping things. Actually, it's more than a couple, but bear with me. You will be here until 9 o'clock. If you need to take a call on your phone, please step out into the atrium. If you're not familiar with the property, restrooms are across the hall. We ask you to please be respectful of each other's ideas and concerns. Please make sure that you've signed in because we will be sharing information throughout this planning process with you via email most likely, or mail if we need to, because we really want to keep you in the loop. And before the end of the night, we ask you to complete the response sheet lying on your table and return it to one of our staff members who's been out signing you up. And our staff that's here tonight is Julie Weaver, Deidre Haggerty, and Susie Kirkham. And I also want to say thank you to the Holiday Inn. They have donated meeting space for our meetings, and we're very appreciative of that. So this planning process began really more than a year ago when a number of organizations and entities serendipitously came together to an understanding that we needed a master plan for downtown. Proposed high-rise development, historic preservation, the potential of losing Macy's, and conflicts over transportation and parking slapped us in the face and made us realize that all downtown entities must work together for the betterment of our community. We had 35 planning consulting firms, 35 consulting firms from across the country that applied to work on this project. I think everybody's interested in fly fishing in western Montana. The firm that we selected is from Portland, Oregon. Crandall Arambula specializes in revitalizing America's city centers. They've done work all over the United States, and we're delighted to have them on board for this project. Between yesterday morning and tomorrow night, they will have participated in 19 meetings. And they'll be returning to Missoula May 13, 14, and 15 for round 2. And they will come back twice more after that. So I think we're getting our money's worth. Let me introduce you to our consultants, and I will ask you to stand. Head of the consulting team are George Crandall. He's an architect and a civil engineer and principal for this firm. Don Arambula, landscape architect, regional planner, and principal of this firm. Jason Graff, urban designer and project coordinator for this plan. He's also with Crandall Arambula. The sub-consultants are Lorraine Roach of the Hingston Roach Group in Grangeville, Idaho. She's focusing on employment and tourism strategies. Dennis Burns of Carl Walker Incorporated in Tempe, Arizona. He was here in Missoula this summer. He is focusing on parking. Mike Robertson is also here from Carl Walker, and again, also focusing on parking. And Brent Campbell of WGM Group here in Missoula. He's a civil engineer focusing on transportation and infrastructure. Joining us in May will be Tom Moriarty of Economic Research Associates in Washington, D.C. He is focusing on that retail and economic development component. So please join me in welcoming these fine folks to our beloved Garden City.
Thank you, Linda. And lights, please. We have our lighting expert here who's going to dim down the lights so you can see these slides. We have a brief presentation, and then the workshop will follow. So away we go. And that, I think, looks pretty good. Can everyone see? I think you can. Fine. Project purpose is summarized here. It's pretty broad. And the study area is outlined in red. And that line isn't firm. We look at connections to neighborhoods and we look at the overlap, but it is basically most of the work will be inside that line. The context looks something like this. People say, well, where is the downtown? Well, you know where it is. And there it is, the red. And the meeting purpose then is to not only inform you about the process, but to get your thinking on issues that need to be addressed. Tonight you are setting up the process. You're giving us our marching orders. And so this response sheet is on the table, and we're asking you to list your 3 top issues and concerns on the sheet. And that allows us then to prioritize or get a sense of what you as a group would like to see addressed in the study. For example, if we go down to those 3 lines and your 3 top issues as an individual, because each one of you should fill out one of these sheets. If your 3 top happen to be maybe ugly signs, stray cats, and dark streets, and we totaled these up and we found that 100 people were concerned about ugly signs, 1 about stray cats, only you, and 2 other people with dark streets, we would say ugly signs had a high priority and we ought to pay attention to it and address it. It doesn't mean that we'd forget about the stray cats and the dark streets, but it certainly wouldn't have as high a priority. So that's why we're asking you to prioritize or list your 3 top issues. You don't have to list them in any order, and if you have more, feel free to list them on the back of the page. So the agenda then for tonight is the presentation as part 1. Part 2 then is a discussion. After the presentation, we'll be open for questions. We're going to have table discussions then about what you think the issues are, and at the same time we're going to ask you to fill out your response sheets individually, and then we'll call for a volunteer from each table to stand up and give us summarize the flavor of the discussion you've had at your table. So, planning process, the one we're all going to follow, is summarized here. 3 parts: a starting, a designing, and an implementing. And this is all about implementing. We hear people say we don't want the plan to sit on the shelf. This one won't. And there'll be a very solid emphasis on an implementation strategy at the end of the study. How do you make it happen in a hurry? There is a schedule. You see it listed here. It's basically running out 8 or 9 months. The first meeting we had when we came to town was in January, meetings with stakeholders. Here we are tonight, meeting number 1, workshop number 1. And tonight you will, as I said, give us our marching orders and tell us what you want addressed. Workshop number 2, we will come back in May with alternatives that respond to your issues and concerns. And we will ask you to evaluate those. And again, each one of you will have a response sheet. Sometimes we call it a ballot. You'll have approximately 20 choices for different things, and it'll be a simple check-off, yes or no, or other. We will take the information you give us at that May meeting, go back and prepare a refined plan, refined alternatives. We will bring those back to you a month and a half, probably a month and a half to 2 months later. And then you will evaluate those refined alternatives, and then we will come back after the summer recess that you're all taking, we know, and we will have the final plan and an implementation strategy for your review and comment. So this is truly your plan. You will determine what it is you want to do, and you will determine what we carry forward and refine. The team is summarized here, too small to read, but we are, Crandall Arambula will take care of the green arrows, the urban design, the public involvement, historic preservation. We're a small firm out of Portland, and our specialty is in revitalizing cities, and we do work then around the country. We live in Portland, and we have worked hard there over the years to make it the best we can. We've had successes and we've had failures, and we have learned from those successes and failures, and we like to cite the successes and, of course, forget about the failures when we put them on the screen. But here they are, some of the successes. We've had some of the successes on the left are before a parking lot that is now a square, and on the far right, a riverfront with a freeway, and afterwards with green. We're assisted by the very capable consultant team that was introduced to you, represented by those yellow arrows. And so the WGM group, that's Brent, of course, is here in town and has a great history on your community and advises us on what has been going on and what is going on today. Economic Research Associates is a national firm. We have worked with them across the country on many retail revitalization strategies, and Tom Moriarty, who will be here at the next meeting. And of course, Dennis is working with us from Carl Walker on the parking strategies, and Lorraine is working with us then on the employment strategy. And so we're often asked, why plan? Well, you probably all know, but we thought we'd remind ourselves. And communities can't avoid change. I mean, that's why you plan. And you want to, in the end, prevent undesirable change. And if you do not have a plan, you're as likely to get undesirable change, and frankly, most likely to get undesirable change without a plan, because you haven't identified your value system and what you want to happen in your community in a form that can be communicated to developers, architects, and to the rest of the community. So the plan is about then creating that communication. So you want to prevent undesirable, but at the same time you want to encourage desirable change, so that when your community changes, it reflects your values, your value system. Now in our community, we've had a couple of downtown plans, and this was one that I led a number of years ago, and it was in response to a number of undesirable changes we were getting. This was an investment in the downtown by a California bank, and basically it decimated the street. We say that it eroded the investment environment in our downtown simply because no one wanted to either. This was so pedestrian hostile, people didn't enjoy walking by it, and buildings across didn't really want to be a neighbor across the street. And we said, if we get many more of these buildings, our downtown will be like any other bad downtown, and we cannot survive economically. And this was a later building, undesirable, again, an undesirable change, blank walls along the street that turned its back on the pedestrian, created the environment where no one wanted to be, and this kind of a parking structure with the blank walls along the street. And downtown can't stand many of these and survive. With our plan and with the design guidelines and standards that followed, this is the kind of building we were able to get. This is a parking structure with that doesn't look like a parking structure, that has a restaurant and a hotel lobby at the ground, a couple of restaurants and a hotel lobby at the ground floor. And this is another one of our parking structures that has a Tiffany at the ground floor. And when you can get a Tiffany in a parking structure, you know you're doing all right. And so desirable. In Whitefish, where we finished up a year or two ago, there was a proposal for expanding Highway 93 through the downtown, where you see that, and across their retail Central Avenue, where you see that red circle, which would have cut their retail Main Street almost in half. We then designed a crossing and an intersection that would knit it together, and informed the highway people that this is what we wanted and this is what they're trying to work towards. So this is a desirable change, and Whitefish, we think, will be the better for it. In Fairbanks, Alaska, where we just finished up a downtown plan, the undesirable change was the lack of retail in the downtown. It had almost all left, and moved out to the edges. And so you see those reds, and those are commercial centers away from the downtown within that black dotted circle, and the red there shows you the amount of retail that was left in the downtown compared to the outlying areas. We came up with a retail strategy for introducing a significant amount of retail in the downtown, a strategy to make that happen, and that will have about 250,000 square feet of retail, and they're moving forward with that today. In Oak Park, Illinois, the home of Frank Lloyd Wright, we completed a plan a few years ago, and they had these kinds of buildings going up in their downtown, and they said, no more, enough is enough. And at one point, they had even closed some streets to create these pedestrian-only shopping environments, and the retail had failed along the edges because they did not have enough density. One of the things we did then was open up the streets, and they sent this to us about 3 months ago, just before Christmas, where they'd opened up the street, and that retail is now thriving, all because of a plan. Racine, Wisconsin, no new investment in over 30 years in the Rust Belt. We finished a plan in 1999 for their downtown. These were the kinds of changes that were happening that had happened in the downtown, and the retail had all moved out. This was a rehab of an old historic building that degraded that building even further. With the plan and the statement of the community's values, this is the same building then that was upgraded right after the plan was completed. In their downtown, they had torn down buildings, they had parking lots, vacant parking lots everywhere. We introduced some park blocks that investors wanted to get next to that started stimulating development. So that's that parking lot area. Now the downtown is full of people and children bring their parents. And of course, that town has been covered nationally. This happens to be an article in a national newspaper talking about the great changes that happened. In downtown Santa Fe, they were getting these kinds of buildings. We call these faux adobes. They are big, overgrown, bloated adobe buildings, fake adobe buildings. This was a hotel. It was too big, too massive, and Santa Fe said enough is enough. At the same time, they had cleared some of the old historic areas and had the parking lots. Part of the strategy then, you can see the infill for that same area was to rebuild at the same scale that had been there as part of their history, and they are proceeding with that. In a simpler project, downtown Lake Oswego in Oregon, this reminded us of Broadway, and it's one of the reasons we have it in. This was a change that had taken place over the years. There were four lanes of traffic, turn lane, 5 lanes, parking lanes along the edge. It was totally inhospitable and to the pedestrian. And these are the changes we made. It handles as much traffic as it did before, except it is now pedestrian and retail friendly, and development then has taken off. So those all because of a plan. Now, your downtown we've collected information, and we're not going to spend a lot of time going over it, but we've looked at your existing land uses. The retail is red, and your retail, as you know, is fragmented. You get red spread here and there. It's not only fragmented, but we think is fragile. We look at soft parcels to determine what might be open for redevelopment. We think this is a pretty conservative estimate that you actually have more than this, but the idea is to look at some of these gray squares, which are what we call the soft parcels. Many of them are parking lots, and see what we can insert then into your downtown over a period of time that will not only improve the economics of the downtown, but will be a great environmental enhancement. You are also doing a transportation plan, which is going to be updated in 2008, and we are going to pay attention to that as well. You have a number of planned projects going on in the downtown today, and we will be we've already looked at many of them, and we're reviewing them, and the idea is to integrate these into the plan so that they make sense and reflect your values and work for your community, not only in the short term but over the long term. So the West Broadway corridor happens to be one of those. There is a plan then for street improvements on Higgins. an idea to convert Front and Main to two-way. The Museum of Art and Culture. The university, of course, has a master plan that was completed in 2006, and we need to reinforce, we need to make sure that we don't do anything that would be counter to that, and we should do everything we can to be consistent with that plan. Interstate Bank, of course, is under construction. The Performing Arts Center has been proposed on a triangle site. The Riverfront Triangle site itself then has more development proposed. The mill site, of course, you have an approved plan for that development, and St. Patrick's Hospital is planning on an expansion as well. So those are the few of the things, some of the major projects that are underway, and then you have a number of smaller projects as well. We need to pay attention to those and make sure that they are integrated nicely then into your master plan. Now, the great downtowns have basically common characteristics, and the places you and I like to visit have an authentic character, and that's number one. And you have a wonderful historic character, and so the blue would, the kind of orange yellow would be on the National Register. You have a number of wonderful buildings, and you have a number of contributing buildings, and so the historic character of your community is unique and it is different, and we admire the historic building stock that you have in place, and these should be emphasized in any effort to improve the downtown. A great variety. In the downtown Whitefish master plan, their historic environment was very fragile. 1- and 2-story buildings along their Central Avenue. And what we're finding is that these kinds of environments, your kind of a historic downtown is being eroded by new development. And this is common across the country. And the last thing anyone wants to do is come to a downtown that looks like every other downtown in the country. And so you have a unique historic building stock. You do pay attention to it. I know you will want to continue to pay attention to it. But it is a precious commodity, and I think we all take our clues from what you have here that is so unique. Our suggestion in Whitefish was they limit the building heights in the downtown, which wasn't all that popular in some sectors, but it was certainly with the general population who understood that they had something very different and they didn't want to see it eroded. In Santa Fe, they have a very unique historic character as well. They work, I think, overtime trying to stay consistent with that character, and that is one reason people come to Santa Fe. One way of doing that is to adopt design guidelines, and you see in the lower right, 1983, our first design guidelines for our downtown, an update in 90 and in 2001. The others are district guidelines. The message in all of this is that once you have a plan, you need design guidelines to ensure that that plan is implemented the way you want it to be implemented. The great downtowns have a retail hotspot, as we call it. You don't go to visit a community because they have a great office park or a employment district in the downtown. You go to shop and to use the restaurants. And so that is the retail hotspot in the heart of the community. We take a look at the places, the sites for a potential hotspot in your downtown. Of course, Higgins has been that traditionally. Your retail then is indicated in red, and it's mostly disconnected. And when it is disconnected and it is fragmented, it does become fragile. So your retail hotspot then is where it's shown here, and you've got then some other competing centers, the East Gate, the South Gate, the North Gate, and there's only so much demand for retail in the community. And the message here is that you need to, and of course the Broadway corridor, pay attention to that. Now in Fairbanks, Alaska, when we started where we finished the plan, you can see the amount of retail, that's the red, out along the edges away from that circle in the downtown. A lot of retail, and consequently, the retail had gradually melted away in the downtown, so there was very little left. They have then competing with the downtown about 2.6 million square feet of retail space. And we needed about 150,000 square feet of retail in the downtown to create a real center, a place that you or I would want to visit. And so part of that strategy was to create that kind of a center. Now we go back to the traditional Main Street, and then here it is, 3 blocks, and you see the anchors at the end of the street, the grocery store, the department store, and the retail being the red, as we say, inline retail without any interruptions and on-street parking everywhere. That is the traditional Main Street. And when retail gets one-sided, it gets anemic. You see the red going to that kind of pale pink, very anemic. And when it gets discontinuous, it really gets anemic. Now, the typical shopping center that followed the Main Street understood that. And so they had the inline retail, and they had the anchors, and they had the convenient parking where you see those red asterisks. And the Mall of the Americas took it to the extreme, at the time the biggest one in the world. And you can even see the creating streets, East Broadway, South Avenue, and the anchors. They understood anchors, inline, continuous retail, and a walking distance of no more than a quarter mile. Now we've used then, going back to the traditional Main Street, to develop a retail strategy for downtown Portland, and that has been very successful. We've done the same thing for Lincoln, Nebraska. That's underway right now. The idea is to bring back their traditional shopping street in the downtown. And in Whitefish, they have approximately 175,000 square feet of retail in the downtown, and we're going to be adding 140,000 square feet of retail. We believe they need this to compete in the region. And so they're moving aggressively ahead then to implement this strategy, making street improvements, and building the parking they need to support that retail, that friendly parking, as we say, grandma-friendly retail parking. Now, the competing retail centers are called lifestyle centers, are being built around the country. And in the last year, there have almost been no shopping centers. They're all called, they are called lifestyle centers, and they are fake Main Streets. They're going back to the old Main Street model. They have the edge-to-edge retail, they have the anchors, they have the convenient parking. And these are destroying downtowns. This one happens to be in Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake City has said that this lifestyle center on the edge of their downtown has sucked the retail life out of their real downtown. We have written about these lifestyle centers masquerading as town centers because downtowns need to understand where the competition might be if it isn't there today, where it might be, and they need to aggressively, and we say this again, aggressively take action to strengthen their downtown retail, or they will fall victim to one of these fake town centers outside of downtown. And so your leadership needs to be aware that this can happen as well, and understand there's only so much market demand, and if it's spread too thin, the weakest retail suffers, and that typically is the downtown. There is a retail recipe for success which we use, and we won't spend any time on this, but it's then summarized here. It's very easy to look at a retail street and evaluate it good, fair, poor, and see what needs to be corrected, and we will certainly do that in your downtown. And what does a great retail street look like, a pedestrian-friendly shopping street in the downtown? Well, you should be able to pick up some groceries, or pick up some flowers, or go to a restaurant, or stroll on the streets, and look into shops for any variety of things, or sit out with your cell phone or a drink along the sidewalk, or Coke, and it should be child-friendly. And so I think a question then for us all is, what do we need to do to create that retail hotspot in your downtown? Strengthen your retail so that it stimulates, it's good for your local economy, it's good for the merchants then who have staked a claim in your downtown. Shopper-friendly parking is part of that retail hotspot. You can't park anywhere. You can only park about 20% of the retail on the street in any downtown. The rest of it needs to be off-street, and it needs to be shopper-friendly. Now, you've got lots of parking in the downtown, and you see these are basically parking lots. And if you did an inventory, you'd probably find that you have all the parking you need. The problem is most of it is probably in the wrong place. We don't know that yet. And you do have one retail parking structure in the downtown, which is helpful, but we'll be looking at how all of this works together. The shopper-friendly parking, and if you do have a parking structure, we say the auto circulation ought to be designed for grandma, because if grandma can't drive in that parking structure, she won't come back, and other shoppers won't as well. So the design of these things, not only is the location important, but the design of your parking structures is a critical component of a retail strategy. So downtown parking, we need to realize that there are different kinds of, visitors to your downtown, the local shoppers, the visitors, and employment, and they have different requirements. The employment guys will park in anything as long as it's in some proximity. The visitor wants to be able to get in and out in a hurry. The local shopper wants to be next to the retail. Another key component is the downtown living room, and we go back to the laws of the Indies in the 1500s when the people were coming out to the New World, and King Philip of Spain said, here's the guidebook on how to build a new town and a new community, and the main plaza was the starting point. So these laws of the Indies taught them how to farm and tax and how to build communities that would endure over time. Now, many of these are left in Mexico, whether it's in Oaxaca or in San Cristobal up high in the hills. And this is the grid that was laid out in the 1520s, that quarter-mile walking radius you can see out from the plaza itself, a plaza in the center and then sub-plazas. Now, this happens to be one in Oaxaca. We analyze these to see why they're working, how they work, because it informs us about then what would work then in this country. These are vital, they are active, and they are the center of the community. Santa Fe has one, and so we find them in this country as well, and as many of you know, this is the living room for Santa Fe, that famous plaza that everyone visits when they visit Santa Fe. In our community, we decided we needed a living room, and so we created Pioneer Courthouse Square, and it has been ranked, it was a few years ago, as the 4th best in the world, and we don't know that we believe that, but we'll take that ranking. And so here was Pioneer Courthouse Square before. It was a parking structure in the middle of the downtown at the crossroads. It was in the right place. You can't put these anywhere. They have to be in the center. They have to be surrounded by active uses. These are not parks. These are plazas. And so here it is then afterwards. That's the parking lot. And these are the kinds of activities and events that take place. And you can see the activity then around the edges of these. And it is truly our signature space. We've designed them for other communities, and certainly we are now doing one for Lincoln, Nebraska, and other communities as well. So we think that's something that any community should consider. Dawn is going to, since I've been talking long enough, we're going to change the pace here, and Dawn is going to take the next piece. Dawn?
All right, thanks, George. I'm going to run around the lap, do a couple laps here, and then hand it off to George for the anchor leg in a second here. But I'm going to go through the rest of this list, and I get to do the fun things, like reconnect to nature and the wonderful things that you have today. City was found on the Clark Fork River, and as we see successful cities, they always tie back to that. So you're fortunate that you've done some investment, and you're doing new investment with some of the parks that you're looking at as part of the Mill District and other areas. So it's a good idea to do that, because people in urban areas are looking for nature as an amenity, especially for things such as housing and other activities. So when we look at your area from an aerial view, it looks like this, and lots of nice green areas. And you've already made some investments that really draw people for gathering places, such as this one at your plaza in Caras Park. And you've got the things that we like to see that draw families. If it can be family friendly, you'll have a successful downtown. The carousel. The physical environment, places for exercise are important. Ideas about how to bridge two sides of the river have been thought about, and you've done actions on it. So you're doing a lot of the good things as far as dealing with your natural area. So the next piece to think about is not only the natural area, but an emphasis on the pedestrian. So what we say is cities that are successful are designed first and foremost for the pedestrian. And if we take that charge, we're generally very successful with developing downtowns. So the first thing that we looked at is some of your street classifications. And when we start looking at the street classifications, a thing that jumps out at us, that they're classified for auto use. So what we'd like to do is have thought about how to classify these not only for autos and bikes, but also pedestrians. So we need to think about things like sidewalks. What's an adequate sidewalk for different types of uses? So for example, if it's in the hot spot, how wide should the sidewalk be? In a residential area, what's the treatment there? We need to think about the crossing. And who is more important as we cross the street? Is it that busy person in a UPS truck, or is it a mother with her baby in a stroller? So we need to start thinking about the balance of these sorts of elements. Again, you've got a high degree of connecting with the university from one side to the other. So when we see people walking in this environment, it says maybe a little bit more graceful and accommodating area should be thought about for the pedestrian. Some observations. The pedestrian circulation system and bicycle circulation system is identified here. And so when we look at bicycle connections, we look for what might be characterized as a complete street network, and we see some disconnects. So we're concerned about how these begin and end. What is that environment for a cyclist riding on a busy street? Who does this invite to use these areas? Is it the commuter bicyclist, or is it a school child going to an elementary school? So we need to think about all the users within these areas. We want to think about the whole array of bicycle systems, whether it's on-street or in some instances a recreation trail or maybe even a commuter off-street trail system. Once you get there, what is the facility? Are they leftover sort of happenstance arrangements for bicycles? And we need to think about premium systems. Are there places for lockers? Are there places for people to ride their bike to work and take a shower? All those sorts of things. And a tourist comes to town. Is there an opportunity for somebody to rent a bicycle? We need to think about that. In the end, we know this, that those cities that have great streets have great downtowns. And conversely, if you've given up on the pedestrian and the bicycle environment, where it's completely auto-dominated, you get this sort of environment. So it's really an important piece to think about when we think about your downtown. Is consisted of typically about 40% of your downtown is in public ownership, the streets and the sidewalks. So if we're looking for an investment environment, we need to think about that. It's an important element of that, and it's often forgotten about. So again, here's some of the images that George showed earlier about Lake Oswego, the wide roadway, and this is what we'd like to see after. Gracious green spaces that are inviting, and also an economic engine, not simply just a good thing to do. Housing choices is part of that balance. Once we start getting some of the fundamental elements, such as the retail hotspot, we need to think of the full balance of things. So what are the things that we'd like to see? We'd like to see a full array of housing choices, not only market rate uses, but also the whole ability to look at workforce housing and other types of sizes for families and those people who are not married. So we need one of the first things we try to do is an analysis to see where you've got some of the housing. And you can see here there's not a lot of single-family housing, but there is multifamily and two-family residential things. As we look at the overall growth strategy that your community is thinking about through your Envision Missoula process and your long-range transportation plan, we need to think about if there's a desire to infill rather than sprawling on the edges of your community, what are the locations that we would find desirable for additional housing? And so when we look at that range of housing types and for the best neighborhoods, we need to think about these sorts of things. Here's an example of the Pearl District in Portland. Certainly was something that it changed over time. On the left side, it was an abandoned rail yard. And then in 2003, you see the housing that it infilled then. Since then, in 2008, in large measure, this is completely built out. So the idea is to do a seamless blend of a range of housing types so that we don't get a district that's completely, let's say, affordable housing and market rate, but mix these two into a fine stew where it's seamless and it's indistinguishable between the affordable workforce and market rate housing types. So the objective we think that works best to make a balanced community is to do that, and we'd like to have your input on what that might be. So here's how the Pearl District looks. There's market rate, affordable, rentals. Let me start again. Market rate rentals, there are affordable housing, those people who are making less than the median income. There are market rate condominiums or for sale types, and they're all oriented in close proximity to parks. Again, looking for those green lungs in your community. And a good rule of thumb is all housing should be within 3 blocks of a public open space for people to live in density. The number one consideration isn't how many washer and dryers you might have, but it's where your proximity to parks and open spaces. So when we look at this, this is a character that we want to see. Affordable, condominium, and rental. All of these are very indistinguishable as far as treatment and character so that there isn't any stratification or sort of isolation of any type of residence. And again, they are focused around these active green spaces and sometimes passive areas. So we need to think about those, again, facing and engaging those as featured elements. There's an emphasis on the pedestrian and bicycle connections also as part of that. Employment opportunities are also a consideration and an important piece of that. You've got some major employers in your downtown that are illustrated here in blue, things such as a hospital, some of your government employment uses such as the county and city uses, federal things, government uses. All those are important pieces, and the question is how can we maintain first and foremost and expand and provide additional opportunities for employment, especially at family wage jobs. We can all add additional retail, but we're looking at wages that can support people to live in this community with rising home costs and other costs for transportation, other things like that. It's often imperative to get those types of jobs in your downtown, and they've got specific siting requirements that we need to do that. This brief summary is some preliminary thought that's been done by the Hingston Roach Group, Lorraine, who was introduced earlier before that. And so here are some of the ideas that as we come back for looking at alternatives, we can start exploring some of these assets that have been preliminarily identified. And you build off your strengths and then try to fill in the other areas. So here's some ideas that we'd like to think about as we move forward as far as employment. So again, your government and uses, your university, the hospital, your private commercial development, all those things are all part of that full complement of employment pieces. Now, thinking about some of the transportation pieces, we don't want to forget about transit and make a valid commitment to that so that it isn't transit isn't a mode of last choice, but it is a first choice for as many people as we can. So it's not only for the poor, but the people who want to not drive the car, especially as we see increasing costs of gasoline, where we hear in projections of $4 a gallon. If we can at least have an option, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, take the bus if needed, or some other mode, we would like to think about the possibilities and where these routes and destinations might be. So we look at the Mountain Line Transit route. You certainly have lots of, for the city of your size, a pretty robust system of routes, and you've got a transit center, what may appear to be in the right location in the downtown. We'd certainly appreciate your input on that. And so here it is as far as a map. Here are those buses that are coming in. into the downtown and unloading and picking up people as they go to outlying areas, a feeder bus system, your hub spoke system. And then what we'd also like to look at some of your other more creative things, your trolley and shuttle routes that look like here, that are illustrated here. We even want to think about your drunk bus, whatever we call that thing, the shuttle. It was too squiggly, as we said, to even show, so we couldn't even put it on here. So anyway, we want to think about those sorts of uses, such as that Saturday market trolley. And if you will, we'd like to think of some of the long-term implications of thinking about other systems, such as a streetcar. So when we talk about streetcar, we talk about a fixed rail system that moves within traffic lanes. This isn't light rail. This is fixed rail streetcars. They're small vehicles that can carry up to 9,500 passengers. There's really a local circulator, and as a minimum, we'd like to engage your ideas about what might occur as a starter system. So, for example, Portland was one of the first cities was the first city with a modern streetcar system, and as a result of that, many cities around the country are following up on that. The key for this is to identify routes that connect up to destinations, and then through opportunity areas where investment can occur along that route in those stations. Because what we've found is that developers like to get next to these, as we say, stations, because they're seen as an investment catalyst for development. So it has certainly played out in Portland. And the difference between this than a bus route is that at a moment's notice, somebody can always move a bus stop, but you've got these tracks in the ground. In fact, you probably even tracks under your ground today. And so whether those are, we know those can't be used, but that gives you a sense of their permanence, that they're part of your overall infrastructure. So it's a good thing to do. So for example, Portland goes from our highest density neighborhood, a close-in neighborhood, to the core. Through the Pearl districts, where we've developed over 10,000 units. And it's been, as a result, we'd love to cite a Project for Public Places, who named this one of the 5 best neighborhoods in America. The downtown core, down to our University of Portland, and then down to Oregon Health Sciences. So imagine those sorts of connections and destinations within the city of Missoula, whether it's the University of Montana, St. Patrick's Hospital, or other destinations that you may want to link. So does this only happen in cities of Portland with a couple million people? No, they don't. There are built systems in small cities such as Kenosha, Wisconsin, and cities are looking at this as a valid means of transportation, not a tourist circulator, but a way of doing it in small cities such as Little Rock, Arkansas. Federal government, as part of the transportation bill, has something called Smart Starts program, where there's an emphasis on building these sorts of the rail lines. So there is a degree of federal funding, very competitive, and the planning needs to happen early if you're to get in line to receive that money. And finally, before I give it back to George and we get into some of these other pieces, we're going to talk about some of the cultural entertainment uses that you have today. And so it's not only a place to work and live and shop, but the place to play. And those sorts of elements are a vital component of your downtown. You see those illustrated here: the Wilma Theater, the Children's Theater, the Missoula Art Museum, the Triangle's discussion about a potential performing arts center. And then we'd also like to think about some other consideration beyond that list that I just ran through, and those have to deal with these sort of issues. You're in a unique place with a unique climate. Winter is a reality as opposed to some places around the country. So we need to think about the special conditions that might affect Missoula. We've worked in even more harsh climates than Missoula. We pointed out we've worked in Fairbanks, where I think a couple of weeks ago was 25, 30 below. So we understand the need for dealing with these sort of situations, climate conditions. So whether it's doing things such as heated sidewalks or something else, we need to think about that. Finally, we also want to think about sustainability or green development. It's the forefront of consciousness with a lot of people around the country that think it's an opportunity for Missoula to be a leader rather than a follower. So how do we incorporate sustainability as part of the downtown? We'd like your input on that. So when we think about sustainability, there are really 4 components about that. How do you design and develop your community structure? How do you respond to the natural systems? The buildings itself, which most people try to focus on. There's a lot of other pieces on it. And then in the end, your energy source and how are you efficiently using energy. So when we think about this, we need to do an array and to respond to how each of these save energy or conserve resources, whether it's building materials or something else. And then finally, again, I'm doing a lot of finallys, reduces impacts of everything. LEED is the standard that has been used for that. It's traditionally been oriented towards buildings, but there is a proposal at this time to look at neighborhood development standards, and hopefully that will be launched by 2009. And we would like to think that this could be a LEED downtown or neighborhood, and at least address some of those components as we think about our planning, whether it's these things such as smart locations and linkages or neighborhood development patterns. Sustainability has been an important part of Portland's development. What we are finding is that because we've had an emphasis on sustainability, especially on reducing vehicle miles traveled by designing an efficient transportation system where 50% of our downtown employees arrive by transit, it has resulted into some incredible impacts onto our economy. What a recent national survey has found is that the city of Portland residents are driving 20% less than any community in the country of our size, and a result of that, it results in a savings of $2.6 billion of money that is reinvested in our community rather than going through our tailpipe and into the environment, and at the same time going into the pockets of multinationals or foreign governments or others who when we'd rather see that reinvested in our local economy. So it's not only just a good thing to do, but there are extreme economic consequences of being green. So with that, I'm going to give it back to George, and he's going to finish it off. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. A couple more slides. In the end, your downtown needs to be child-friendly, because if it is child-friendly, they will come. And in the end, it's about economic development and quality of life. You can't have one without the other. And quite often, the quality of life is forgotten, and certainly you have a high quality of life here, and that should be featured and enhanced. And so, we are ready now for the second part, the discussion. You've all been so patient. And so we're going to open it up for questions. We have a couple of mic runners here to take a mic around to someone who has a question. Do you want to grab it? I think we have to hand these off over here so we can hear your question, and we'll take those for about 5 minutes. Then I think we'll cut this back to about a 20-minute table discussion. In other words, what do you think is important, not important? What do you think the issues are? And we are asking you during that period of time as individuals to fill out your response sheets. And at the end of that 20 minutes, we will then ask for volunteers, one person from each table, to stand up and summarize what was talked about. And so with that, let's have the lights on up and talk about your issues and concerns. Now, there's another piece of paper at each table, and it has to do with Missoula zip codes. And if you would pass that around your table, we're interested in where you live as it relates to the study area. And so if you could just put your zip code, circle what your zip code is on that sheet, or check off, I guess, next to it, where you are, that would be very helpful. And Don.
Yeah, and we also have a map on every table. These aren't museum pieces. There's markers on the table. Mark them up.
Yeah, and we will pay attention to those. So you can indicate your issues and concerns on those. And so Finally, the next meeting, and we hope you will attend, will be in May, and we will be coming back with alternatives that respond to your issues and concerns. And if you want to find out what you said tonight, you can find out online at this address. We're going to leave it up here. And so we're open for questions. Questions. Raise your hand and someone will approach you with a mic.
Clarification.
Or clarifications about all of this. Yes, sir, over here.
You mentioned the word fragile in several different slides. Could you explain that a little bit more about a fragile downtown and that definition?
A strong downtown, a retail environment, you don't worry much about it because there's a lot of activity and your rents are high. It offers a broad range of goods and services for your local community. If a downtown retail environment is fragile, it's usually because the retail has been eroded, it is discontinuous, it is not edge to edge in your downtown, and if it is not edge to edge, shoppers are discouraged or not encouraged to come downtown. We find that the rents are low. We find that uses convert, for instance, to one area as it did, I think the other day, to, what was it, a
Church.
A church is now on your main street in the downtown.
Not that we don't like church.
Yeah, churches are wonderful, but they don't belong in a retail environment. So you're starting to pick up uses that are inconsistent with a retail environment. And so when that happens, when retail is discontinuous or it is one-sided, or you're getting uses inserted into, for instance, Higgins, that are not retail, you are in a fragile situation. And we go to any number of communities where that has happened over a period of time, Fairbanks being a good example, when basically most of the retail then has disappeared. So we think you're on the edge. You can go up and you can strengthen it if you do the right things, but if nothing is done, who knows? We think you're fragile. Thank you. Yes, sir, back here.
You had a slide that showed the county courthouse, and you mentioned government offices, local government, as an important part of bio downtowns. I found that interesting, and I'd like you to expand on that a little bit. I guess especially since I started to hear rumblings about the county thinking about moving its offices out of downtown.
We met with the county. We are aware of their program. I think they have a very open mind about what happens. They have some space needs that are very real, and they're looking at their alternatives. And we will engage them in that conversation as this planning exercise proceeds. So let me just, having said that, it's important that government set an example for the private sector in any community. And if you want your downtown to stay strong, government needs to stay downtown. Government services need to stay downtown. And when the government starts moving out of the downtown, it sends the wrong signal to the private sector. If you don't have the confidence and the wherewithal to strengthen and stay within the central area of your community, why should a private investor? And so there may be, we never know, there are reasons for doing certain things, or sometimes some services are split off, but we believe that the county has a very open mind about all of this at this time.
The other thing to keep in mind is that they have some economic impacts. You've got quite a few employees that have buying power, that spend money in the downtown, whether it is for lunch or buying goods and services. That's very important to keep that in there. It's a large dollar amount, and when you do the analysis of that, and we can get back to you on specifics about that. It's also important to think about it from a transportation standpoint. When people have limited time and resources, they're often using county services during their lunch hour to go over to get something that they need, even a marriage license or whatever it might be at a county. I don't know if I do that lunch, but but you know, the sort of uses that you might need at the county offices at lunch, rather than hopping in your car and adding to congestion somewhere out in an outlying area. So if we can keep these compact and walkable, it's a more efficient and effective way to use your current infrastructure in your downtown.
Yeah, over here.
How important is residential living in the mix in terms of percentages of people that actually live in the downtown district?
It's extremely important because people who live downtown walk downtown and they use the downtown services. And so your services, your retail gets stronger the more people that live in close proximity. The other thing is that they provide the activity on the streets 24 hours, not 20, but we say 24 hours a day, but basically there are people on the streets, and so it feels safer and more secure, and so other people want to be there. So you have every reason for trying to increase your residential population in the downtown, and when people move out of the downtown, quite often it creates an environment where really no one wants to be.
The other piece, again, is thinking about retail. You've got three main users of your downtown retail. There are visitors, there are employees, and then residents. If you're anemic with your employees, you're missing part of that golden triangle of potential customers for your downtown. So, and in fact, in successful cities, that's usually the number one person who uses the retail, the guys who are close in. So it's your people who live in the downtown and surrounding neighborhoods are your best customers if you're a retailer. So it only goes to reason that more people you have in downtown, the more successful your retail will be. Likewise, it's more likely to get more retail in the downtown if we have what we call rooftops in the downtown. So they're intricately linked together, and it's not a chicken and or egg, but you've got to have all the right components coming together at the same time.
Yes, sir.
I have a question that touches on that point. I'm sorry, right here.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what kind of market analysis has been done to show that retail will come, that you provide all these spaces, and that's a driving factor for this revitalization.
Economic Research Associates will be doing that. They're doing that work right now, and they will look at the retail demand. But what I need to tell you, I'll give you Racine as an example. They spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on a retail, because they had all the retail had moved out. They wanted to know what they could attract, what the demand was. The answer came back: there is no demand, you're cooked. It's over. And they said to us, what do we do? And we said, well, let's call that phase one. Phase two is to create the kind of environment that retail would want to locate within. And so you can actually attract market demand. You are going to be building retail in your region no matter what. It can be built out on the edges, or it can be built in the downtown. And the idea is to attract it to the downtown, create an environment where the retail investor knows he can win, he can't lose, and he wants to be there.
The other thing to keep in mind is that George touched on this on the Lifestyle Center, and he talked about briefly, but the reality is over the last 5 years, there's only been one enclosed shopping mall built across the country. Retailing has changed. Lifestyle centers is where it's at. There are literally 100 of these have been proposed and have been built in the time that only one shopping mall has been built. And they replicate a downtown. You got the downtown. Don't reinvent it. Strengthen what you have and give it an authentic piece of it. This city has a healthier, well, it may be fragile, a healthier downtown fabric for retail than most cities of its size. It's something you need to be diligent about and not get comfortable and complacent about, because it can happen. What we warned in Whitefish, we said you strengthen your downtown in Whitefish because there's a wolf knocking at the door. And what happened 2 or 3 years later? There's a lifestyle center proposed in Kalispell, 11 miles away. But they have a strategy to compete with that, and they're moving forward with it. So be aware of the competition and beat them at it.
Lots of questions here.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble prioritizing because I like everything. And my question is related to hers. In your experience, you know what should come first, I think, from experience. Should the rail system come first? Should we build the retail up first? Should we build the housing first? Because it can't all happen at once. So, at what point does the market system take over? And I think you answered that by saying if the investor, the person with the money who's free and willing to invest somewhere, he chooses to go downtown. So at what point, I'm just trying to put the puzzle together. What thing should happen first, and then the free market thrives, and we don't have to pay you anymore?
Well, you don't expect me to tell you after that, do you? It's different in every community, but when we run through the slideshow, there's some clues in there about the great downtowns. And what we always say is the retail is the toughest one to get right. Everything else is pretty easy in comparison. And that doesn't mean it should be first or a top priority. And when you have those 3 blanks on your sheet, it doesn't mean there's a number 1, number 2, number 3. It just means that these 3 things, you think these 3 things are important. And it really doesn't matter what we think. You need to, a lot of this is just common sense. And you have a strong dose of it here in this community after talking to you for 2 or 3 days and before. And so go with your instincts, give us your best shot at what you think the top 3 are. And if everyone does that, we know that we will be responding to what it is you want to do. It really doesn't matter what we want to do. And if we think that we are not getting what you need to drive this process forward, you also have a steering committee who will be reviewing the results, and they may want to make some adjustments. But we've never seen that happen. We've always find that the community does the right thing, has the right value system. It has to respond to your value system, so do your best. Thank you.
We've got in the back, and then you're next.
Hi there. Hello. One of my is between corporate business and say like the small business. I didn't like what I saw that happened in Santa Barbara, for instance, where they really upgraded their downtown, but what they did was force out the local bookstores and the small shops. I wouldn't want to go to a downtown that looked unique, but in fact has just every other store that's everywhere else. How are you going to make sure that some of our made in Montana and homespun businesses remain a vital part of our downtown?
You've identified an issue that will need to be addressed. For instance, in Santa Fe, where we did their downtown plan, they were very successful. They had a very healthy retail environment, but none of the locals could shop there. There wasn't anything that the locals wanted. It was geared for the tourist trade only. So our job was to try and reclaim the downtown for the local community. And there are a number of ways of doing that. It's easier, in fact, to do it going your way, where you're trying to strengthen the downtown, because you can have certain codes and ordinances that give incentives to your locals because they need to come first. You can do things to discourage big box or national chains. Now, some of those aren't bad in the downtown because they bring some customers in. But we'll be talking to you then about what the kinds of retail you might consider, the kinds of things you may need to do to ensure that your locals stay strong and they stay in your downtown. We often use a ratio where you can only, if you have over more than 10% of the national retailers in your downtown, you start losing the character. One reason people come here is because you're unique and you're different. They don't want to come to a generic downtown that they can find any other place. And so in the end, that's just bad for your economy. And we'll want to talk to you about the actions you can take to respond to your concern, because it's very real.
I'm going to give you the other hand. On the other hand, there's a need for national retailers. For example, Macy's. They're a vital component where people who would normally not shop in the downtown and who aren't looking for, and I don't want to offend anybody, a specialty gift like a candle. They're looking for things, the goods and services that they're going to use on a daily basis. There's a certain assumption of quality and familiarity. Those are needed in your downtown. They will strengthen your local retailers. One of the things that we want to do is be strategic and use those where they're needed to draw and strengthen the local retailers, but not dominate them.
My question deals with finance. Several years ago, this community, the downtown, put up quite a bit of money to develop a plan to come up with a model for the 2 blocks north of Broadway on Higgins for a street plan. And a beautiful plan was put forth by the creators. And we learned that we really don't have the money to develop that plan. Are you going to come up with a bunch of ideas that we can afford, or are you going to address how we finance your ideas?
We will address the money issue big time. This plan needs to be implemented. The financing of improvements is an important part of that. What we often say is that your vision needs to be bold, and if the vision is not bold enough, it's always difficult to finance it because no one gets very excited about it. So the bold vision, it's up to all of us to develop a bold vision for your downtown. Those Higgins Street improvements will certainly be a part of that. Should that be your #1 priority? We don't know yet whether they should be. But at the end of the process, we will be there may be a couple of hundred things that could be done, but only half a dozen may be what we say significant or catalyst projects. You can't do everything all at once. You only have so much energy and so many resources, and so we will identify those things that will give you the biggest return in the shortest period of time. So if you are talking about making street improvements, do you know what the return would be in the way of private investment that might follow? I don't think any of us know that yet, but as part of this exercise, we will be identifying what we call investment ratios. And for every $1 of public money, you like to see $6 or $7 of private investment stimulated, and that is typically a break-even point in most municipalities if you were just to do a straight bond on it. So we give these plans a high degree of reality, an implementation strategy, priorities, a schedule, and so stay with us, remind us, and we will all get there. Thank you.
As someone who's had to go to Helena or Bozeman or Kalispell for statewide conferences, I've often wondered if it would be possible for us to host a convention center big enough to garner regional and statewide conferences. I've often wanted to have that downtown. How important is a conference center for our downtown, and do we actually have the space to dedicate to that?
That's also, you're hitting all the good ones here. We have talked about that, and in most communities that we work in, we identify, or we say you need to position yourself for a convention center, sometimes called a conference center. We prefer to call it a convention center because a convention center has high ceilings and in the meeting spaces, so you can drive a truck in if you want to drive it on in. But it takes space. And too often these are located out on the edge of town, and as soon as you put a convention center on the edge of town, you are graded way down in the overall national market because people want to come to conventions that are in town so they can walk out of a session and shop in the downtown or go to a restaurant. So the idea is to find a site and Lorraine has been looking at this, and we said we're just kicking around numbers here. Typically you start with about 30,000 square feet, but you need to know how you're going to bump it up if you're really successful, if the community grows over a period of time up over 100,000 square feet. You need to attach a headquarters hotel to it always. If you do not have the headquarters hotel, you are in the second tier in the national market. People want to come to a convention, stay in a headquarters hotel with most of the delegates, walk under cover or out of the weather then into the convention center for the events. And so there's a formula here that we need to pay attention to, because if you were to build one you want it to be in the top tier, to be Class A, to have planners come to your community and say, not only is this a great community, but this is a great convention center. You are not ready, our belief is, in the market for it yet, but you need to know where you would build it if you were to build it. There needs to be a placeholder. And if you don't have a placeholder, what often happens, that land gets gobbled up for something else, and then you never have one. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe you wouldn't change your mind later on, but as part of this exercise, we will be looking for a place because we're going to be looking at employment here in town and the visitor, how we can increase the visitor traffic. We will be looking for a site, and we'll be giving one to you for your consideration.
Yeah. They're often, we need to be cautious about how these are implemented and make sure you get that full array of program that George identifies, simply because a lot of cities have seen a convention or a conference center as what we would describe as a silver bullet project, which is going to solve all their ills. And they build them, and they rue the day that they did that, simply because they didn't build all the needed components for that. So, for example, one of the key components that we had to investigate when we did the downtown plan for Knoxville was how to deal with their convention center, which they didn't build a headquarters, a hotel. As a result of that, they had an annual shortfall of operating budget of $6 million that was drawing out life and blood out of their city's government, simply to keep this thing afloat that they thought somehow would be the savior for their downtown. So our first task was, obviously, how do we get them a convention center headquarters hotel? So we've got to be very careful how we do these sorts of things.
This isn't a question so much as a pitch.
Okay.
My name is Jim, and I am the chairman of the Missoula Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. I quite agree that certainly every downtown needs a resident population to feed the activities and the life of the downtown. I'd like to hope that any planning that comes out of this effort includes an opportunity for the Housing Authority to provide affordable housing for the clientele that it serves. The Housing Authority serves the 0 to 30% income households in our community, the poorest of our households. But due to HUD cuts in our funding, we're also looking at opportunities to find sources of income that will include our provision of housing services to other economic strata of our community too. You know, with 30 to 80% income, and even market rate, workforce housing as well. So if we see a plan that comes out of this, I'd love for it to see our authority have the opportunity to develop housing that might be created in the airspace over public facilities. Public facilities like community offices, that's to say city or county offices, parking garages, and other opportunities for us to place our clientele in a situation where they can be served by all of those opportunities that are, housing, not housing, but health services. And you don't need transportation when you live downtown. So I hope that comes out of this effort. Thank you.
We look forward to working with you to develop your program in more detail. So we would concur with your concerns, and it should be an important part of the plan. Now let's take 2 more questions, no more, and then have 20 minutes and then table reports. So any more questions, or are we there? One over here, yes.
When you're talking about making it a safe neighborhood and a safe place for people to walk, I'd like to see 2 things. One is the police department to stay in our neighborhood, and the other is to do something about the transients or the Poverello people who, if they've been drinking, they don't have a place to stay, so then they're on the streets, and that's not going to make it safe for everyone.
Thank you. One more? Yes, sir, over here. And then, we'll wait until this is finished.
You talk about 6-to-1 ratio with private funding and public funding. To do that, you're going to need a catalyst to start it with. to get the public funding involved with the private funding involved with the public funding. What is your example of how we could use, where we're going to get the money for this catalyst to start this way?
Well, it varies, and we can give you all kinds of scenarios, but let me use a place called Medford, Oregon, where they had about 12 blocks of land in the downtown that were used car lots, parking lots, and the car lots all moved out to the edge of town. The issue is, what do they do with those vacant lots in town that were really a blight adjacent to their downtown retail core? We prepared a plan a year and a half ago and said, okay, here's what you can do, and here's how you can strengthen your retail, here's how you can tie it into the downtown. You can create an employment area and a housing area, but you need to build an amenity. The amenity happened to be a set of park blocks that were about three blocks long that they were different character for each block that would appeal to a certain market segment. And they need to make some roadway improvements. We ran the numbers on those park blocks, and the cost was $10 million. The renewal agency did not have the $10 million, but we said that's what it would cost to do it. A developer looked at the scheme and he said, if you'll build those park blocks, I will come. And we had estimated the amount of private development that would be stimulated because it created the kind of environment that a developer wanted to get next to. And he said, I will build the $140 million investment. Those agreements have been signed with the redevelopment agency. They are responsible for building the park blocks, and he will build the $140 million. But they said, we don't have the $10 million. He said, I don't care. I'll build the park blocks, and you can pay me back over time from the tax increment that I will generate with my new development because I'm an urban renewal area. So there was no public money up front. There was no risk up front, and they will pay him back from the taxes he will generate in the downtown. So there are creative ways of doing this. It isn't as if you need a bunch of cash in your pocket. In other cases, you never go ahead with the public improvements until the private sector makes a commitment. In Racine, it was some public improvements, about $3 million, but we knew we could get a developer to do about $40 million in private where there'd been none before. Those agreements were signed before the city spent a nickel. That I'll spend $3, you invest $40, and they were off and running, and again the tax increment then paid for the city back on the $3 million.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, it's good business for the city. So for example, we showed you examples of the Pearl District in Portland, and that's an urban renewal area. As this thing sunsets, there's about $600 million of increment that has been created for that the city's trying to figure out what to do with $600 million. It's a good problem to have. So, there can be some economic advantages for your community.
And with that, we'll be around to answer your questions if you raise your hand. Now, it is 8:04, and at 8:24, we are going to ask for table reports. So if you got a volunteer from your table, just stand up, give us a few words. You can say, here's what we discussed at 8:24. And if your table wants to pass on a volunteer report, that's all right. So and while you're in the next 20 minutes, fill out the response sheets, and then we'll call for table reports. And so with that, away we go, and we'll be around to answer any questions you have if you raise your hand. And we're not going to let you out unless you turn in a response sheet.
Good job.
The first table report. Would you raise your hand, please? Raise your hand for a table report and let us know what was talked about at your table over here. Hey, we have a volunteer over here. Table report. One now. May we have your attention, please? What was talked about?
Well, we talked about the election for a while. So we thought of several things. First of all, we thought it would be be a great idea to somehow find a way to get another anchor store downtown, because we're so vulnerable with just Macy's down there. We thought more and better signage to tell people where the off-taken stores are. And we were concerned about the number of dead spaces downtown, such as the old Mountain Lion place and where I guess where the phone company is, that kind of stuff. And we also said don't give in to the big club wielding employers.
Thank you very much. Another volunteer, a hand up. Oh, we've got one over here.
Okay, one of the first things we noticed was all of the bare surface pavement in very prime downtown areas that seem to be delegated just to parking. And so we were thinking these are really good opportunities to change more parking, to make it multi-level. Someone actually, I had a chance to ask him about putting parking above existing buildings, if there's a way of doing that, which is really innovative. Anyway, but just, not having this flat surface parking downtown, it's just taking up valuable space. And in that, we could also possibly find, to get rid of that, some good city center, park, square, piazza sort of idea. There's a lot of good locations for that. Unfortunately, one of those locations is exactly where would be a good place to put the police department new building downtown. We want to keep government downtown. It's really vital. Anyone who works at Gordon's knows that. And then also to encourage and build any new structures to 2 to 4 stories. We have some beautiful tall buildings downtown that are 4 to 5 stories. They're just absolutely gorgeous, and we can build additional buildings to fit in with that design.
Thank you.
I made a comment about the desirability of affordable housing downtown as a member of the Housing Authority, but also there, unbeknownst to me, another member of my table said the very same thing. A long-term resident of Missoula said what she really liked about Missoula was the vitality provided by all income levels, all sorts of people when she first came here 30, 35 years ago. Also have a couple of comments about arts. That the arts in Missoula, somehow we need to increase the visibility of the arts in the downtown, both in street art and in recreation opportunities, and also in the increase in professional arts and entertainment.
Thank you. These are great summaries.
Next.
Another volunteer, a hand on anywhere in the room. Here, right over here.
We can come back to that side, so not escape.
Our group was looking at the downtown.
And would you give us your name?
My name's Steve Loken, and I got elected here. We were looking at the downtown core, and I guess one thing I wanted to mention too is the context of the downtown and what we're talking about here shouldn't be independent of the context of the rest of the valley, because we're going to have to figure out a way to house 100,000 more people in this valley in the next 25 years, and this downtown will have to play an important part of that role. So we think that a lot of the parking areas and asphalt and impermeable surfaces downtown could actually be turned into residential, more residential vitality downtown, multi-story buildings as the city matures and becomes an older teenager instead of a juvenile, would help to vitalize that economic core downtown so that they could, in fact, the condominiums and apartments above, could be rented or sold to help subsidize the retail space of the main levels below, and local businesses could still stay down there. But I'd also like to promote that I think in the next 20 years, the energy issues that drive urban cities and their transportation systems will probably totally be changing. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to make cities, urban cores, be producers in terms of urban ecology, find ways of making buildings and the transportation systems and the ability to even grow food and conserve water in urban areas, in future thinking ways might be a way to make this downtown be a producer instead of a consumer, as well as putting a lot more people down there. And buildings, I believe, and I think we talked about this a little bit, is buildings could actually have rooftop gardens and terraces so that everybody could be close to food and water and the things, the amenities we need as animals and organisms in an urban environment. We also talked about the North Higgins area is all like 1- and 2-story buildings. And if that is in fact part of the urban core, that's kind of a slow retail area, and we certainly need to revitalize that with more urban densification for residential there. And as Jim was saying, I think you can have all ranges of income into that North Higgins area. And a couple of other, services. We talked about the city building downtown where the city hall is. That whole block is an opportunity for densification and verticality so that it becomes the heart of downtown Missoula right next to the courthouse. And then the Garlington Road and Robson parking lot, that's a huge opportunity for Missoula Redevelopment Agency and others to put in commercial, residential condominiums and retail and parking. And I also think that parking vehicles should be charged according to their size. Big rigs pay more, small rigs pay less. Then you can still get people downtown, the incentivization to have smaller vehicles come downtown before a transit system can take hold would be a transitional way of allowing lots more people with four-wheel vehicles downtown. Anything else?
Thank you.
Just a comment that if you have any specific sites that you mentioned on your map, mark those so we're aware of those.
Another volunteer, back here, yes.
I'm Teresa Cox, and our table spent the first 5 minutes saying how excited we are about the whole thing, especially the integration of diverse projects, having transition zones that make the mixed use work together, that we really need to get a handle on our unique qualities and preserve our authenticity in what we come up with in our plan downtown, so it's not, we don't choose to be this when actually we're this. We need to stay true to what we really are. So we need to have a balance between preservation and development. We like the town square idea. We really like the idea of green spaces downtown. Right now there's green spaces along the river, but not much is oriented that way. It would be nice to orient a little more that way, but also to have green spaces in the center as you talked about. We have one, the map on our table is a little bit different from the map on the response sheet. In the map on the table goes straight up Gerald Avenue, and on the response sheet it goes in a block from Hillgate High School toward Higgins, and we think that it should stay true to the map that's on the table. And then the most important thing about it is a couple of people talked about how are you going to make the money for us to do these things. And I think it's really important for all of us to realize you're not going to make the money to do these. You'll help us, you'll give us ideas, but these are our ideas, it's our city, and it's our responsibility to take ownership of that and make those things happen ourselves.
Thank you. Another volunteer.
I'm Sean Roberts. I think the theme of our table can be summed up as having Missoulians become stakeholders and create ownership in downtown. And there are really 3 key areas that we discussed about that. The first is the retail piece. We need a vital retail center in downtown to encourage people to come there, to encourage people to spend time there, whether they're out-of-towners or employees or just residents in other parts of the valley. The second, and I think is really symbiotic with that, is the spaces downtown.
I was never good at geometry.
Creating the living spaces downtown for residential occupancy, because that will really help boost the retail. And the third, I think, that ties it all together is the transportation issues that we're going to be facing as a growing city in the future. We're going to need additional transportation options, and that's going to be what ultimately encourages people to come downtown, because they'll have the ease of living there or getting there if they don't live there. Thank you.
Oh, there's another, we've got a couple over here.
Hi, my name is Kim Murray, and representing one of the coolest tables I've ever been with at one of these things. I got to tell you, we covered a lot of ground, and in somewhat random order, we talked about the fact that we already have a lot of these positive elements going in our favor, and that it's very important that we not drop the ball, but that we go ahead and take it, run with it, and fine-tune and improve what we already have going. It's a great foundation to launch from. We talked about the hip strip and some of the concerns in that area. Parking, zoning, feeling a disconnect from the downtown. They really are a major part of our downtown retail hub. And so instead of looking at the map in terms of a circle starting on the north side of the bridge, we would recommend more of an oval that would include the south side of the bridge, because that's really the gateway into the downtown area. We also talked about the distinct areas, within this right here. We've got the mill site, we've got the downtown center, we've got a couple of different areas, Eastgate, and we realized that if you don't have the right transportation and the right residential mix and tie it together, that it would be very easy to have a disconnect. And so that led us to talk about walkability. We really feel that we need to finish the trail system along both sides of the river, paying special attention to things like lighting and safety and the aesthetics of it. We were so fortunate to have an awesome river going right through the middle of our town. Most people don't get that. And there's a lot of ways that we can capitalize on that and make it an even better amenity to our town. We talked about residential density, supporting those distinct areas like the mill site. We focused quite a bit on transportation. We talked about using that to tie the centers together. We talked about a rail system. We also talked about needing places to park outside of this core so that people could get on the transit and come in, because as our residential grows, those people are getting places to park too, and we wanted to see the walkability of the area improved, and that would lend itself to the transit. We also talked about, what else did we talk about, guys? Hold on, page 2. We talked about using the downtown as a hub throughout our entire community, and instead of competing with things like North Reserve and the Brook Street corridor, we talked about complementing them. And one of the ideas was to have van pools going back and forth to the hotels. A lot of the hotels are over on the North Reserve area. Well, why not have van pools going back and forth, bringing them downtown, and utilize the transit system to, as I said, complement downtown and the other areas as well. We talked about maintaining the unique flavor of our downtown. It's the heart of Missoula, it's the town center, and there's 1,000 Walmarts. You can go to any town and go to a Walmart, but you can only go to one downtown Missoula. And so we need to really make sure that we're keeping that authenticity. I think that's one of the other tables' term for it, and just that unique flavor. We talked about our neighborhoods, how important they are. We also talked about the fact that as we are expanding our residential base, that we have to be careful that all of the building isn't condos that none of us can afford. Downtown Missoula is for Missoulians. And other people are invited, but we need to be there too. So, it's very important that we have an affordable housing mix in there, something that working families, young families, downsizing families, professional people, that they can all take part in. We also talked about being mindfully aggressive in our funding and incentive programs to make these type of developments feasible and workable and sustainable long term. That's it.
Well, I'm only going to need about 20 minutes for this. We talked about one of the things was the economic vitality of downtown, the importance of good retail, the affordability of it. And another important thing came up was the residential, the mix of residential, how important that is. If we have good residential downtown and people living downtown, more people will come there. Well, it'll create a demand for more services downtown. Transportation was also important, which also
tied into the parking issues, and also Dan said something important that a lot of people, he said that he talks to that don't come downtown. It's because of parking problems and transients, so those are two important issues. We also talked about the river and the importance of it, the health of it, and also with what's going on in Milltown should change our river as well, so may have an impact on downtown. One last thing we talked about was the gateways into downtown at the Orange Street and Van Buren, and also the Higgins Bridge, and not real attractive gateways, and maybe something we can do about that.
Thank you. Volunteer over here.
Oh, there we go. We also talked about parking, where it's going to go, will be most effective, how it's to be built into anything that's developed. We talked a bit about access to downtown from all directions, getting people in and out. Primarily we talked about cars, but other modes of transportation as well. We discussed where and how hotspots will be developed, the amenities that will go around them, the possible creation of various districts within the downtown area itself, and then locations of municipal offices, including police departments.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see if we can keep this thing going here. Tim France, you guys might be surprised to find that our table's top priority is parking. We're not going to say too much more about that, but other things that were brought up are shopper-friendly sidewalks, having bulb outs, and having traffic that's slowing down, that provides for a safer, more comfortable atmosphere for pedestrians. Along with that also, we talked about better street lighting, which I particularly think is a really big issue in downtown Missoula. Also, one person brought up the aging populace of our general population in Missoula, and that with that, some of these components need to make it more senior friendly, such as having maybe a transit center that's a little more central. Of course, a parking structure at the north end of town came up, and the need to educate shoppers about parking. And also we talked about how to get what we can do to get offices out of ground floor retail in downtown buildings.
Thank you. Hand in the back.
I learned a very important lesson that I probably should have learned in high school: never leave the room at the end of a discussion when there's someone that's going to be voted on for doing something.
Chris, your name?
Exactly.
He's a plant.
Chris Bean. I work with the redevelopment agency. I think that we spent a lot of time talking about housing, like a lot of people did here. Interestingly enough, somewhat different than some of the other tables, the word parking only came up once in the 20 minutes that we were talking, and it was just in passing. We talked about affordable housing, workforce housing, and one of the people at our table had a very good example of having to import employees into businesses, into a town that they worked in at one point, and was really hoping that was not going to be a problem here. But making that affordable or workforce housing is a significant part of the residential mix. I think that another important comment we got at our table was to enhance the opportunity for younger people to invest in residential property within a good distance of a variety of services and entertainment in the downtown. I think we talked a lot about senior housing in the downtown, but I think that the generation now graduating from college and those that are following them closely are very interested in more higher density type living than I might have been. We talked a little bit about assuring the maintenance of the current infrastructure and future infrastructure is in place before it's expanded. We talked about investment incentives and how they work for a variety of developments. And then real quickly at the end, if we're talking probably too much about housing, we went around the table real quickly and just added several different words to the end of the list here. And those that came up were streetcar, light rail system, pedestrian-friendly sidewalks, bike racks as public art, sustainability incentives for all new developments.
Thank you.
My name is Lori Davidson, and our table talked about many of the things that the other tables talked about, with a few additions, I think. Talked about taking some of the scattered parking lots around downtown and maybe redeveloping some of those and consolidating parking into other parking structures with housing on top, of course. And how to keep retail downtown either through zoning or incentivizing that, and not just on Higgins, but to have a lot of the feeder streets that go into Higgins also, so that you're paying attention to the retail on those streets that will lead you into Higgins, which basically right now is our main street. Would love to be able to find some money to rehab the Park Hotel. It's a great structure. It's kind of falling apart inside. It provides really good housing for lower income people, but it's also very important to try and develop housing downtown that is mixed income so that you get a good mix and not all one or the other. Very important to keep government downtown. We'd love to see a way to be able to do that, recognizing that they need room to expand, and we're not quite sure how that could happen. Maybe they build it up. Take the old, something like the old Missoulian building and put 2 or 3 floors of, maybe even 4 floors of housing on top of that. Love to be able to find some money for that, and you're going to help us with that, right? And let's see, streetcars. We want streetcars that go connect downtown, go up Russell Street, go through the Champion Mill site, maybe even into other areas, but something that connects all those really important areas that we're starting to redevelop now. I think that's all.
Thank you.
For the most part, I think everything's been said. Just a couple things I think that our table feels could be re-emphasized is especially the cultural aspects of Missoula, that some of these arts and culture oriented spaces, and really making sure we plan for that and keep that in mind. Also, the environment came up in a multitude of ways, but especially in transportation and just encouraging that sort of green space and that sort of thing. Also, the economic viability, it was mentioned that we sort of shrug our shoulders when we talk about salaries in this town, and it's time for us to start making a living for ourselves and really encouraging that. So.
Thank you.
We'll reiterate also, I think our table was pretty interested in creating a good environment for pedestrians, and that tied into the idea of having a living room downtown, as well as that's also a pedestrian space, and how some of these things start tying together, having more gathering places for people. So it's still sort of this pedestrian focus with this group here at the table. Convenient parking shuttle transit arrangements, something that's running every 10 or 15 minutes if you're going to use it. And building height, not letting that get out of control and ruining our skyline and access to light.
I'm just going to run through the list of things that we talked about here. We spent a lot of time talking about parking because we had our parking consultants at the table. So we filled them in on our thoughts about that. But I'll just run through the list of what else we talked about. Pedestrian bicycle transportation, arts and culture activities for tourists and residents, tourism as economic development, wayfinding, housing downtown, in particular owner-occupied housing, parking issues, of course, more greenery. And when you look at the overhead view of it just looks really gray around our city center. Recreation activities, places to sit and watch, traffic and transit, and also the transient population, I think, is a deterrent for some people when it comes to coming downtown and also living there, especially on weekends and especially intoxicated people. So I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. How are we doing? Any more tables? Linda? I don't think we have any more tables. You opened the meeting, would you like to close it?
I'm a closer.
All right, I know you're a closer. Whoop, we have a report over here. We can have a minority report too, thank you.
I haven't heard something that I think is very important, and whatever focus comes out of this plan needs to get buy-in from local government. If you identify areas that you want to see converted from existing use to a new use that the plan identifies, then I think that in those areas you need to look at the regulations and find a way to streamline those regulations and allow permitting so that your plan can be implemented with the cooperation of local government so that it can go forward with incentives rather than hindrances and impediments to that development.
Thank you for that reminder. And I think we have heard from everyone, and Linda's going to close, but I want to thank everyone for coming on out and spending the evening with us, giving us all of these thoughtful comments, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. Great job.
I'm not sure there's a better way to summarize that, but Larry, as a city elected official, a county elected official, and a representative for a state representative, we thank you for being here and for your comments on that. So the next round of meetings will be May 13, 14, 15. We don't have the public workshop scheduled yet, as it depends upon when meeting space is available, but it will be an evening on one of those 3 days. And as you leave tonight, please make sure that you leave your response forms. And if you have folks who have strong ideas about downtown, they can pull one of these off the BID website. Again, that's MissoulaDowntownBID.org. And they can fill that out and send it in either to the BID office or to the consultants, and their address is on this form. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. It's so important, and we really appreciate your input. And good night. Yeah, I already announced that, Ally.
You can sign up if you're interested in that.